What if werewolves didn't originate from folklore, but from a contagion? A pathogen, not a hex. A sickness concealed for ages, protected by those vowed to redeem spirits. What if the church didn't merely dread the creature, but sought to heal it? And what if it couldn't? Picture seeing your friend's flesh tear, his voice warp into wails, his pleas morph into growls, and realizing neither science nor faith can save him. Would you bind him in a sanctuary or drive a blade through his chest? Would you hide the secret or reveal what still prowls the wilderness? Welcome to Tales of Mythology, where ancient tales, buried terrors, and otherworldly battles spring to life. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden facets of myths, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell below to stay updated with every epic tale. The forest was cloaked in a veil of restless quiet under the night sky. Father Augustin gripped his mantle closer against the biting autumn air, scanning the shadowy tree-line beyond the hamlet. Earlier that day, villagers had hauled a body to the churchyard, a farmer found ripped apart near the wood's edge. The gashes were unlike anything Father Augustin had witnessed, deep claw marks, limbs chewed as though by a monstrous predator. Under the glow of torchlight, he whispered final blessings over the mangled remains. A knot of fear tightened in his gut as a pair of glowing amber eyes seemed to peer from the gloom among twisted oaks, only to vanish with a stir of foliage. Murmurs of loup-garou, werewolf, rippled through the villagers' frightened whispers that night. They insisted it was a fiend in wolf's guise, for no ordinary beast could wreak such havoc. Father Augustin tried to soothe them, his tone calm with rehearsed conviction, yet uncertainty gnawed at his mind. In far-off abbeys, he had pored over ancient manuscripts and heathen myths. He knew stories of men doomed to turn into monsters, mere fables, he told himself, metaphors for vice and brutality. Yet, the proof lay before him in shredded flesh and blood-drenched soil. Could there be truth in the tales? He muttered a soft prayer, seeking guidance from the divine, but only the distant cry of a solitary wolf answered, resonating through the valleys. By midnight, a hunting party was formed, despite his warnings. "No wolf can stand against 5 stout men," proclaimed Sir Hugo, the Baron's huntsman, brandishing a lance. Father Augustin joined out of obligation and a dark curiosity he kept silent. Lanterns swayed among gnarled branches as they ventured into the dense woods where the farmer had perished. A foul stench of rot lingered in the fog. The men spread out, muttering vows to repel evil. Father Augustin clutched his wooden cross, heart racing with each snap of brittle leaves beneath his boots. Overhead, a waxing moon broke through the clouds, bathing the clearing in an eerie silver glow. A twig cracked. A deep snarl rumbled. The priest's breath hitched. From behind a towering oak, a massive shadow sprang. The creature moved faster than their torches could track. In the mayhem, Father Augustin caught sight of matted fur, jaws dripping with blood, and eyes gleaming with unnatural cunning. A villager cried out as clawed hands, merciful heavens, swatted him aside like a straw figure. Steel glinted as Sir Hugo drove his lance into the beast's side. It let out a guttural, otherworldly howl that sent 2 men fleeing in panic. Father Augustin stood frozen, gripping his cross, a faltering Latin prayer on his tongue. The wolf creature's eyes met his across the glade, a stare not of a beast, but of some anguished trace of humanity. With a growl, it tore free of the lance, dark blood spraying in the moonlight. It charged at Father Augustin. In that moment, a hunter thrust his torch forward, its flames searing the creature's muzzle. It recoiled with a yelp of agony and, limping from its wound, fled into the forest's shadows. The assault ended as swiftly as it had begun. In the stillness that followed, Father Augustine heard only the labored breaths of the men and his own pounding pulse. The monster had disappeared, leaving only snapped twigs and a trail of blood vanishing into the heart of the woods. They found a young hunter, Martin by name, moaning in the brush, his chest and arms shredded by claws, barely alive by some miracle. He gasped wetly as Father Augustine swiftly tore strips of cloth to bind the bleeding gashes. By the pale light of the moon, he saw the wounds were deep and strange, their edges already blackened, as if infected by some foulness. Martin's eyes rolled wild with fevered fear. "It burns," he rasped, clutching the priest's arm with surprising strength. "God, save me. I've been cursed." Father Augustine shuddered but forced a calm tone. "Be still. You're in God's hands now." Yet, as he spoke, an unease tugged at him. In those wounds, and in that monstrous gaze he met beneath the moon, something unholy had taken root. The night's terror was but an omen of far darker days to come. Throughout history, tales of dogmen appear in nearly every culture. From the cursed lichen of ancient Greece and the cynocephaly of medieval Europe to the rougarou of French folklore and modern sightings such as Wisconsin's Beast of Bray Road. However unbelievable they seem, each of these accounts is rooted in some level of truth. A primal fear deep in humanity's subconscious that can be traced to mankind's first contact with a devastating virus known as the Lycanthropic Parvovirus. They carried Martin to the village's small chapel, where Father Augustine tended him through the night. The young hunter's fever climbed mercilessly. His skin burned to the touch, yet he shivered as though ice coursed in his veins. In his fevered dreams, he thrashed and muttered, eyes rolling beneath his lids. Father Augustine dripped cool water between Martin's cracked lips, and the man gulped it down with desperate thirst, draining an entire jug before dawn. Sweat poured from his body, soaking the straw mattress. By candlelight, the priest saw red streaks spidering outward from the black-crusted bite on Martin's shoulder, as if poison crept beneath the flesh. Augustine whispered prayers over him, but unease gnawed at the priest's mind. This was like no sickness he knew. Come morning, Martin's fever broke suddenly. For a moment, Father Augustine dared hope. But as sunlight strained through the slats of the chapel's shutters, he found Martin awake, staring vacantly at the ceiling. The young man's eyes were bloodshot, pupils strangely dilated. When Augustine spoke Martin's name gently, there was no sign he understood. A low growl rumbled from Martin's throat, so beastly that the priest stepped back. Martin's lips peeled into a snarl. Concerned villagers hovering at the chapel door gasped. Father Augustine motioned for them to stay back. He approached slowly, hands raised. "Martin, can you hear me?" he asked softly. Martin lunged without warning, feral and sudden. The priest barely caught Martin's wrists in time to prevent the man from raking jagged, broken nails across his face. The strength behind that frantic attack was startling. Martin's fingernails split and cracked, yet he seemed to feel no pain. Two farmers rushed in, and together they bound Martin to the cot with ropes as he thrashed and bared his teeth like a wild beast. "Lord, preserve us," one villager whispered, crossing himself. "It's the curse. He's turning into a wolf." He too had noticed unsettling changes. Martin's face was flushed and contorted with mindless rage, veins bulging at his temples. Coarse stubble now coated his cheeks and jaw, far thicker than any overnight beard growth. Patches of bristly hair peppered his arms and even the backs of his hands. When the morning light caught Martin's eyes, they reflected back an eerie red gleam, like an animal's. The priest thought of old stories of the devil's eyes and nearly made the sign of the cross. Instead, he drew a shaky breath and forced himself to think rationally. If this was truly a curse of shape-shifting, why did it come on so gradually without the full moon? And if it was a demonic possession, why did Martin not recoil from the holy water Father Augustine had sprinkled on his brow? The droplets had done nothing, simply rolling down the fevered skin. That afternoon, Father Augustine dispatched a courier with an urgent letter detailing Martin's condition, praying it would reach those in the church who might understand this affliction. As dusk fell, villagers gathered outside, whispering rosaries by candlelight. Martin's condition worsened. The ropes bit into his limbs as he pulled with inhuman force. Low, guttural snarls came from his throat. Any human words were long lost. Dark hair sprouted across his skin, and by lamplight, Father Augustine saw the beginnings of elongated canines pushing through Martin's bloody gums. The priest's blood ran cold. No mortal illness could cause such an abomination. When the village's elderly priest arrived at midnight to offer help, he took one look at Martin's half-changed form and blanched. "This is unholy," the old priest hissed, clutching his crucifix. "We must exorcise the demon or put this poor soul out of his misery." Father Augustine stood protectively between the delirious, snarling Martin and the other priest. "Not yet," Augustine said, his voice trembling. He would not abandon Martin's soul. The young man had begged for God's help in the forest, and that plea still echoed in Father Augustine's mind. He was determined to do everything possible to save him. In the small hours before dawn, Father Augustine sat alone at Martin's side, praying and watching. Exhaustion weighed heavy on his eyes. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the chapel's eaves with a lonely howl. Within, Martin had grown eerily quiet, his breathing a wet rattle. The priest leaned closer, worried the man might be near death. Without warning, Martin's eyes snapped open, now a pale, icy blue. A snarl tore from his throat, and in a convulsive surge of strength, he snapped the rope on his right arm. Father Augustine stumbled back with a cry of alarm. Martin moved with disturbing speed, lunging from the cot on all fours, knocking aside a lectern and candles. Startled, Father Augustine saw a hunched, furred shape scramble out the door into the night. By the time Father Augustine gave chase, Martin had vanished into the darkness, leaving only the distant echo of a howl. Shaken, Father Augustine sank to his knees at the chapel threshold. He gazed out at the moonless night and the foreboding wall of trees that swallowed his afflicted friend. How would he find Martin now? How many more would fall victim to this horror before it ran its course? Clenching his fists, Father Augustine steeled himself. Whether by science or sacrament, he vowed to find a remedy or at least to spare Martin's soul and prevent this blight from claiming others. The Lycanthropic Parvovirus is zoonotic, transmitted to humans by the bite of an infected canine, almost always a gray wolf. The virus is highly specialized, infecting only canines and primates. Thus, the most common victims of lycanthropy are those who often encounter wolves, hunters, trappers, foresters. A week passed with no sign of Martin beyond the occasional discovery of mauled livestock on the outskirts of nearby hamlets. Father Augustine, weary and grim, spent those days scouring the woods by day and leading anxious villagers in prayer by night, clinging to hope that his letter would bring help. That hope arrived in the form of an unlikely visitor on a moonlit eve, an inquisitor from Rome. Clad in a travel-stained black cloak and escorted by 2 Vatican guards, Father Vincenzo appeared at the rectory door without fanfare. The Italian priest's eyes were sharp with intelligence and something like dread as Augustine welcomed him inside. By the light of a single lantern, Vincenzo broke the seal on Augustine's letter and read it in silence. Only the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed his disquiet. "You were right to send word," Inquisitor Vincenzo said at last in a low voice. "And right to urge secrecy. These matters are best kept from common ears." He produced from his satchel a leather-bound codex, its pages yellowed with age. Flipping through brittle leaves, he showed Augustine a folio of inked sketches and Latin annotations. By the lantern's glow, the younger priest beheld drawings of men with wolfen heads and claws. His eyes widened. "You have seen this before," Augustine breathed. Vincenzo's lip twitched. "Not I, but the Holy Church has long kept such damnable knowledge, scattered reports, ancient and modern. We hoped they were mere folktales or devilish illusions." Vincenzo's expression was grim. "Your testimony leaves little doubt, a genuine case of lycanthropy." He whispered the last word. At dawn the next day, a small search party set out under Vincenzo's direction. They tracked broken branches and spatters of. Under cover of darkness, they transported Martin to a long-abandoned abbey nearby. Within those cold stone walls, by the light of devotional candles, they secured the unconscious creature to the floor with iron shackles fixed to heavy rings in the masonry. The clink of chains echoed in the barren chapel hall. When Martin stirred at last, Father Augustine approached with a lantern. The captive creature snarled and strained against his bonds, but the chains held. Vincenzo stepped forward, clutching a silver crucifix and a vial of holy water. "This unnatural transformation of God's creation will not be allowed to persist," he declared, his voice reverberating in the hollow space. "If a demon holds this man's soul hostage, we shall expel it. And if not, then God have mercy." Father Augustine stood by, heart pounding. He yearned to say this affliction behaved more like a physical plague than a demonic possession, but he held his tongue. The Inquisitor's eyes burned with righteous resolve and fear. Any suggestion that this horror was not spiritual in origin might be seen as heresy, so Augustine only nodded and silently offered a prayer for Martin's deliverance. As the first Latin phrases of the exorcism rite tumbled from Vincenzo's lips, the chained creature threw back its head and howled. The ancient stones trembled at that sound, a raw cry of anguish and fury that blurred the line between man and beast. Many consider lycanthropy a mere metaphor for the duality of man, the struggle between our enlightened selves and our basest instincts. Such philosophical discussions may have merit, but the reality is that werewolves are very real. The ancient abbey quaked with the echoes of the beast's howls as Father Vincenzo's exorcism chant rose in fervor. A half-dozen monks and guards stood in a wide circle around the chained figure, their faces pale in the candlelight. Latin prayers rolled off the Inquisitor's tongue, invoking Saint Michael the Archangel and all the hosts of heaven to cast out the evil they believed held Martin's soul. But Martin's body was racked not by the voice of any demon, but by the final throes of a horrific metamorphosis. Father Augustine watched in helpless horror as the creature that had been Martin convulsed against the chains. With each uttered verse of exorcism, another wave of grotesque change rippled through the creature's form. Bones cracked like splintering wood, muscles bulged and shifted beneath bristling skin. The creature's muzzle, for it was now undeniably a muzzle, elongated further, its fanged maw foaming with saliva. One by one, the last remnants of Martin's human teeth were spat out, clattering to the stone floor, replaced by rows of jagged canine fangs pushing through bloody gums. His fingers, already clawed, stretched longer, joints popping as his hands contorted into fully beastly paws tipped with hooked talons. A monk wretched at the sight and fell to his knees, tearing his rosary beads between trembling fingers. "Begone, unclean spirit!" Father Vincenzo thundered, flinging holy water that splashed uselessly across matted fur. The chained werewolf only snarled in greater fury. Its eyes, now fully the yellow gleam of a wolf, fixed on the circle of men surrounding it. With a guttural growl, the creature lunged against its restraints. The iron rings in the stone groaned. One bolt burst free from the wall with a shower of dust, granting the beast sudden slack in its chains. In a heartbeat, it reared up to its full towering height, manacled arms outstretched. A guard, who had stepped too close, was seized by the throat in a clawed hand and lifted off his feet. The man screamed, kicking desperately. Chaos erupted. Another guard drove his spear forward, impaling the creature through the flank. The beast roared but did not release its victim. Father Augustin, heart thundering, rushed forward with trembling resolve. Snatching a fallen battle-axe from the floor, one the guards had brought as a last resort, he swung with all his strength. The axe bit deep into the werewolf's arm, nearly severing it at the elbow. With a pained howl, the creature dropped the strangled guard, who collapsed, gasping, to the floor. Enraged, the wolf beast rounded on Augustine. Its massive jaws snapped inches from the priest's face as he stumbled backward, losing hold of the axe buried in its limb. Just then, Father Vincenzo stepped forward, brandishing his crucifix like a sword. "In nomine Dei." "Yield, fiend," he cried. The creature swiped a muscled arm. The silver crucifix went flying, and Vincenzo was batted aside, crashing into the altar with a bone-cracking impact. The werewolf tore the embedded spear from its flank, dark blood oozing from the wound. It panted in ragged breaths, preparing to spring at the nearest man. Father Augustine realized with cold clarity that Martin was truly gone. No prayer or rite would restore the humanity that had been lost. There remained only one grim mercy he could offer. As the beast crouched to leap upon a cowering young monk, Father Augustine seized a discarded sword from the flagstones. With a desperate cry to heaven, he drove the blade into the creature's broad chest. The sword pierced through the ribs, seeking the monstrous heart. The werewolf howled, a soul-wrenching sound that echoed from the rafters, then shuddered violently. Clawed hands clutched at the blade protruding from its chest, as if in disbelief. For a moment, the creature's savage yellow eyes met Father Augustine's. In them, he thought he saw a flicker of something beyond animal rage, perhaps the final recognition of a soul about to depart this world. The beast toppled onto its back with an earth-shaking thud, rattling the broken chains. It gave one last wheezing growl, blood bubbling on its fangs, then fell finally silent. Father Augustine stood over the dying monster, chest heaving and tears streaking his face. "Requiem aeternam dona eis, Domini," he whispered shakily, granting what final prayer he could for Martin's soul. Around him, the remaining monks and guards gathered in stunned quiet. The only sounds were their ragged breathing and the drip of blood from the altar steps. The air reeked of iron, sweat, and the musk of beast. In that silence, Father Augustine realized the truth: Martin was free at last, not by exorcism, but by the sword. Where holy invocations had failed, cold steel had severed the final tie between man and monster. Outside, the first light of dawn was creeping through the shattered doorway of the abbey. In the coming hours, they would bury what little semblance of Martin remained and scrub the blood from the stones. They would speak in hushed tones of the night's events and wonder if it was truly a demon they vanquished or something far more disturbing to the ordered world of faith. Father Augustin knew only that the nightmare had ended here in this forgotten sanctuary, under the gaze of God and morning's early light. Yet even as the sun broke over the horizon, chasing shadows from the corners, a darkness lingered in the hearts of those who had witnessed the terrible metamorphosis. Some horrors, they would learn, do not fade easily with the dawn. The common notion that a werewolf transforms with the full moon and later resumes human form is pure fantasy. The changes that the lycanthropic parvovirus enacts upon its host are completely irreversible. 3 days after the nightmare at the abbey, Father Augustine found himself in a candlelit chamber deep within the Vatican's apostolic palace. His hands trembled slightly as he set quill to parchment, drafting the final lines of a confidential report. Every horrific detail, Martin's infection, the gradual corruption of his body, the failed exorcism, and the violent end, was inscribed in Latin prose that only a handful of church scholars would ever read. At the bottom of the parchment, Augustine wrote the instruction that had been impressed upon him: a decimum secretum archivarum transfer, to be transferred to the 10th secret archive. When he finished, a red wax seal bearing the papal insignia was pressed to the scroll, locking away the truth of the lycanthropic plague from the eyes of the world. In the aftermath of Martin's death, the Church moved swiftly and quietly. Inquisitor Vincenzo, badly injured but alive, personally supervised the destruction of the beast's remains. Martin's deformed body, which hours after death had already begun to stiffen back toward a more human shape, was burned to ash in the abbey's courtyard under the sign of the cross. What little could not be consumed by flame was gathered and buried in hallowed ground, as one would inter a suicide or unbaptized infant, without ceremony and outside the bounds of consecrated soil. The handful of monks and guards who had witnessed the ordeal were compelled to swear holy oaths of silence. Each man knelt before the injured inquisitor and placed a hand on the Bible as he vowed never to speak of what he had seen. The cost of breaking that vow was left ominously unstated. Father Augustine took the oath last of all. The words tasted bitter on his tongue, but he spoke them with conviction for the sake of a greater peace. When villagers from the countryside inquired about the strange lights and sounds from the old abbey, they were provided a familiar fiction. Father Vincenzo, in recovery, spread word that a dangerous heretic had been captured and dealt with by church authorities, an evil sorcerer whose experiments had alarmed the locals. This explanation, however implausible, was enough to satisfy most. Peasants knew better than to question the Holy See. And so, the official story was penned into local parish chronicles. An excommunicated madman had been vanquished by God's servants, and all was well again. The name of Martin, the humble hunter who had fallen victim to a ravenous virus, never appeared in any chronicle or prayer. In the records of his village, Martin was simply listed among those missing, presumed dead during that autumn. Under the gaze of aging cardinals in a closed session, Father Augustine delivered a sanitized briefing of the incident to a Vatican tribunal. He spoke of a creature deemed to be a demon in wolf's form, careful never to imply that a natural contagion had been at work. The prelates listened with stony faces. In the end, they concluded that the matter was resolved and best forgotten. One silver-haired cardinal issued a stern decree. Any future rumors of wolf-men were to be dismissed publicly as folklore or delusion, and any actual occurrences were to be handled with the utmost secrecy. The Church, he said, has a duty to shield the flock from knowledge that could sow panic or doubt. It serves no one's faith to know that the line between man and beast can blur by means other than the devil's tricks. The gathered clergy murmured assent. As he left the tribunal hall, Father Augustine felt the weight of that statement settle on his soul. The line between man and beast had indeed been blurred, and not by witchcraft or satanic possession, but by something older and more indifferent, a force of nature or God that he could not name. In quieter moments, Augustine wondered if they had done right. Perhaps humanity was not ready to face this darker facet of creation. Perhaps it was a mercy to let the world continue thinking of lycanthropes as mere fairy tales or fiends from hell. And yet, part of him feared that by burying the truth, they had also buried any chance to truly understand or prevent such horrors in the future. Late that night, Father Augustine stood alone in a vast archive chamber lined with towering shelves of manuscripts. He held a single lantern aloft, its light dancing across the spines of countless forbidden texts. Somewhere among them would soon rest his own report of the Lycanthropic Parvovirus outbreak, locked away, likely never to be read again. The heavy scent of dust and aged ink filled the air as he walked between the rows and placed the scroll into an empty slot high on an oak shelf. In that moment, a profound fatigue washed over him. The ordeal was done, consigned to silence and shadow. Before departing, Augustine allowed himself one last indulgence. From inside his robe, he withdrew the small, blood-stained crucifix that Martin had worn around his neck in life, a personal token retrieved from the ashes. The priest pressed the crucifix to his lips and whispered a final prayer for the friend he had lost to darkness. Then he tucked the relic into a hidden nook between ancient tomes, a silent memorial far from any prying eyes. Satisfied that the memory of Martin would not be entirely forgotten, Father Augustine turned and slowly made his way out of the secret archive. He closed the iron-bound door behind him, enclosing forever the secret of the wolf-men in the vaults of the Vatican. The findings that weighed upon us have become a heavy burden. In my more doubtful moments, I wonder if perhaps some things are best left in the dark. Father Augustine lived out the rest of his days in the service of the Church, his outward demeanor as pious and steady as any parish priest. Yet in quiet moments of prayer long after midnight, he could not escape the memories that lurked like shadows at the edges of his mind. In the confessional of his own heart, he relived the night of chains and howls, the moment he drove cold steel into the chest of a friend-turned-monster. Though he never broke his sacred oath of silence, the ordeal marked him indelibly. In nightmares, he saw Martin's yellow, feral eyes staring through darkness. He woke with the phantom echo of a howl in his ears and whispered a litany against evil to calm his racing heart. Years turned to decades. Father Augustine grew old and frail, carrying the secret of lycanthropy as a silent penance. On the eve of his final breaths, he penned a last entry in his private journal, a document never intended for any eyes but God's. In wavering script, he confessed his lingering doubts and fears. I have seen that which confounds the boundary between man and beast. I have beheld a plague neither fully demonic nor wholly of this world. If it be God's will, let mine be the last soul to bear this knowledge. The journal was locked away with his other modest possessions after his passing. Its contents were quietly absorbed into the church's vaults. Father Augustine's gravestone in his little village made no mention of the horror he had witnessed. It simply bore his name, the dates of his life, and a small carved lamb of God watching over a wolf beneath its feet. But the dark tale did not end with Father Augustine. The Vatican's secret archives grew over the centuries, filling with countless chronicles of the strange and unholy. Hidden among them remained the scroll of the Lycanthropic Parvovirus case, gathering dust. Officially, the Church never spoke of werewolves again, except to denounce them as pagan myths or the devil's deceptions in antiquated sermons. Unofficially, however, whispers persisted. In distant monasteries and cloisters, select scholars of the forbidden occasionally stumbled on oblique references. A 16th-century inquisitor's letter hinting at men who run with the wolves, or a suppressed village chronicle from Eastern Europe describing a blood-mad wolfman slain by holy intervention. These hints were always buried quickly, concealed behind ecclesiastical Latin or dismissed as metaphor. The few who knew the truth ensured that it remained enmeshed in secrecy. As the modern age dawned and science blossomed, the ancient affliction of lycanthropy receded further into legend. Doctors and academics came to interpret werewolf sightings as mere madness or folklore. And yet, the reports never truly ceased. In the 20th and 21st centuries, remote hamlets and quiet highways still yielded the occasional chilling account of a hulking, fur-covered figure seen under the moonlight or a rash of animalistic murders with no culprit. Each time such a story surfaced, the Church's enforcers of secrecy took quiet note. A discreet investigation might be launched, or a local authority nudged to attribute the carnage to wild dogs or deranged hermits. For the Vatican knew that as long as wolves prowled the forests, the old virus, undetectable and deadly, could spark again like a smoldering ember catching the wind. In a forgotten wing of the secret archives, behind lock and key, Father Augustine's account lies sleeping to this day. Generations of cardinals and archivists have come and gone, sworn to uphold the silence. The parchment is yellowed with age now, its ink fading, but the dread it contains remains potent. Those few who have dared read it by flickering candlelight report an uncanny feeling that the very words are alive, that as they turn each brittle page, they can hear distant howling carried on an invisible breeze. The truth within those pages is a constant reminder of humanity's fragility and of horrors that the Church, in its wisdom or folly, chose to veil from the world. To this day, travelers crossing lonely moonlit roads sometimes speak of large, unnerving shapes moving just beyond the tree-line. Livestock are still found torn apart on occasion in ways no ordinary wolf could manage. Such stories are quickly dismissed as superstition or sensationalism. After all, we live in an age of reason. But in quiet Vatican halls, a select few still stiffen at each mention of wolf-like creatures in the news, their blood running cold with an ancient fear. They know what the world at large does not, that the nightmare Father Augustine and Martin faced was not a singular curse, but part of a hidden natural reality. The shadow of lycanthropy has never been fully banished. It merely slumbers, waiting for its next cruel awakening. Even now, as the centuries-old warning lies locked away, the low keening of a wolf on a distant hill can send a shiver through the soul. Mankind goes about its days blissfully ignorant of the predator that history has tucked into its darkest corner. But on certain nights, under certain moons, something primal and malevolent still stirs in the wilderness. The Vatican's guardians pray that the secret will hold, and the horrors of the past will not return. Yet in their prayers lingers an unspoken dread, a question that can never be comfortably answered. When the next innocent wanderer screams beneath rending claws and finds their own body twisting into a creature of nightmares, will anyone be prepared to face the truth? Some night, you may find yourself wandering through a lonely wood. You will not see the attack coming. And if you miraculously survive it, you will retain your wits just long enough to witness your skin sprout fur, your limbs lengthen, and claws erupt from your fingers as the agony and madness overtake you. Prompted only by a lowly virus, metaphors and philosophies will not cross your mind. You will be consumed by only one thought: to kill,